طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد. So we'll resume where we left off, and namely the Hadith of Jabir and Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhuma when they prayed in the safina or the boat standing up. And we mentioned previously about the mashaqqa sharia, or what's considered to be mashaqqa or undue hardship in terms of the sharia. And we know that hardship, as I mentioned, in of itself is not one of the intents of the sharia. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. And Allah has not made from this deen haraj, or undue hardship. Right? And the hadith or the khabar that says الْأَجْرُ عَلَى قَدْرِ النَّصَبِ, that you rewarded as much as hardship as you endure, doesn't mean that you seek out hardship or that hardship is intended. But if during the course of your amal, of your ibadah, of your devotion, some hardship is incurred, then know that you will be rewarded for that, for enduring that. But the Sharia doesn't tell you that it's a goal, it's an object, an intent to bring hardship upon yourself. Aisha radiallahu anha narrated on the Prophet ﷺ, ما خير رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين أمرين إلا اختار أيسرهما ما لم يكن إثما. Prophet ﷺ did not have a choice between two ways or two matters, except he chose the easier one, of course, as long as it was not something that was sinful or haram. ما لم يكن إثما, يعني something that was sinful. So, seeking the path of ease within the confines of the Sharia is the prophetic way. It's not a way of people who have weak deen or don't understand their deen, so forth. Hardship comes and we cannot avert it, and we are muttar, we have to. That's another matter. But if we have two routes to the same thing and the same goal can be accomplished, why would we take the more difficult route? And that's why the ulama said that al-rukhas sharia, that legal dispensations are even preferred to be taken when you have the valid shurut, conditions for the dispensation, than to do the azima, or to do the more difficult option or the regular option. So many of the ulama say, for example, that the sunnah for salat al-musafir, that the preferred sunnah, the better way to pray when you are musafir, is to pray shortening your prayers. That's preferred, because that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. When he was traveling, he prayed 2 instead of 4 for both Dhuhr and Asr, and 2 instead of 4 for Isha. Of course, Maghrib and Fajr, there's no qasr. But those 3 that are 4 rak'ah prayers, then that's the way he prayed. And so that's your sunnah, that's better, that's preferable than that. And even some of the madhab, like in Malikiya, they say that if you happen to pray 4 with jama'ah, for whatever reason, then even to repeat your prayer as 2, so that you get the sunnah al-safar, the sunnah of traveling, is also a recommended act to do. So again, it's not about the effort or shaqqa or how we make things difficult, but rather it is about following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was to take dispensations when they're there, and not to think of them as only for the weak or for the unable or the feeble. Prophet ﷺ was none of those, but yet he did take the dispensation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And sometimes the dispensation, the mashaqqa, can come to the level of what we call ad-darura. And darura means necessity. In other words, when it reaches level of darura, it almost, in many instances, if not all, becomes wajib, becomes obligatory upon you to actually take that dispensation. So, for example, if you are stranded somewhere and you have nothing to eat except something that is usually unlawful to eat, like pork or something of that nature, then if you're going to die otherwise, that's the type of darura we're talking about, you will die, you have to eat it. And it's not meritorious for you, and if you starve to death, you die sinful. You have to eat it, because preserving your life, in this instance, takes precedence over committing an unlawful act, namely eating pork. And in this case, it's no longer unlawful. It's actually halal. Remember how I said the hukum, the ruling can change with the situation. Ruling can change with the situation. So if the situation changes, then the ruling changes. And this is talking about those rulings, those ahkam that are mu'allal, or that have an illah. Illah means there is a discernible reason behind it that causes it to be haram or halal, which is different than hikmah, the wisdom behind something. And many people confuse the two. You know, when I say, for example, that the wisdom behind the prayer is that I can draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Masalan. So then someone might say, as some of the misguided people before us said, they said, we're already close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've arrived. We have arrived. We don't need the prayer anymore. Because if that's the reason, then we don't need that reason. Imam al-Junayd was asked about these people, and when he was told, الْقَوْمْ قَدْ دَعُونَهُمْ وَصَلُوا, right, the people saying that they've arrived, he said, نَعَمْ وَصَلُوا لِسَقَرٍ. They've arrived, but they arrived at hell. That's what they've arrived at. So the wisdom behind the prayer is to draw nearer to God subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the illah, which is the legal reason behind it, is not known, or it's not discernible in the sense that we can say you no longer have to pray. And that's not true for anybody. There are certain conditions of validity and conditions of what we call obligation. If they're not fulfilled, like some of them said, suppose you are somewhere and you have no means to make wudu or tayammum, right? And you might say, how's that possible? You could be in a jail cell and they don't let you out. You don't have either the earth and you don't have water. What you do? Some of them said in this case, you don't pray because the condition of obligation for the prayer is that you have means by which to make wudu or to make tayammum. While others of them said, no, you pray because prayer never is never to be removed. It's always an obligation. So even if you don't have the necessary conditions, you still pray. And then you would make it up later, for example. Two different opinions. But the important thing is that, as I mentioned, those rulings that have an illah, a legal reasoning behind them, if the legal reasoning goes away, then the hukum also goes away. And that's what qawl al-fuqaha when they say, al-hukmu yaduru ma'al-illa wujudan wa adaman. That the ruling goes with the legal reason or the legal ratios behind it, wujudan wa adaman, in its presence and in its absence. So if you read the books of the fuqaha, they say al-khamr, or wine, the muskir, it's intoxicant, if it becomes or turns into vinegar, then it's no longer haram, it's halal. Why? Because the prohibition behind khamr, or intoxicant drink, is what? Is the fact that it's intoxicating. It's muskir, clouds the mind, ghiyab al-aql. That's the reason. So that means anything that clouds the mind in that sense is also haram, whether it's wine or beer or drugs. All of that would come under that understanding. But if something intoxicating changes into something else, which they call istihala, changes into something else and becomes vinegar, which is possible, then in this case it becomes halal. So the ruling no longer exists because the legal reason behind it no longer exists. So in terms of things of dispensation, of darura, things of necessity, when the situation changes and the legal reasoning is no longer there, such as, or there is a more pressing legal precedent, such as preservation of life, takes precedence over what? Preservation of aql, of intellect. Why is illegal drugs and intoxicating things haram? Because you no longer have control of your faculties. It may cause you to do actions you normally wouldn't do because your mind is clouded, just as when people become intoxicated. That's the way it works. But if you're faced with something that's more pressing, you could lose your life, right? Then preserving your life takes precedence over a temporary loss of intellect. And so that's how the parameters of the sharia work. So here when Hassan al-Basri says تصلي قائما ما لم تشق على أصحابك تدور معها, right? So as long as there's no mashaqqa on you or your companions. Then the next part, تدور معها, you move with it. What is he talking about? Why would I move with it? Anyone know? What does he mean by moving with the ship? What's he going to move? One of the conditions of the salah is facing what? Al-Qibla, right? Boats don't always go in a straight line, right? Sometimes they make turns. You know, you see in the movies they say, give me port, steer 80 degrees, or aye, captain, and you know, turning the thing. So the boats are steering and changing direction and things like that. So that means even in this situation, if you have the ability to fulfill a primary condition of the validity of the prayer, which is facing the Qibla for the fard prayers, then you have to face the Qibla. So تدور معها. تدور معها means you move with it. Face the Qibla as you can. That means you're actually moving during your prayer, right? But we heard that you can't move during your prayer, that it invalidates the prayer. Yes, but this moving, what they say is called al-islah as-salah. It's actually for the preservation of the prayer, or preservation of the condition of the prayer. It's much in the same sense if a woman is praying and the hijab slips and some of her hair is uncovered. What should she do? Pull it back, even if you're praying. Why? Because even this small action, you're doing it for the maintaining the validity of the prayer. So much in the same way, if you're moving on a moving boat and it changes direction, then you should change direction with the boat to face the Qibla. وَإِلَّا, right? وَإِلَّا. Illa here means وَإِلَّا, unless فَقَاعِدًا. So there's some kalam that's mahdhuf, as we say. There's something omitted. That's why when we read these hadith, unless you've studied the Arabic language, you will not be able to understand, like what's written in between the lines, so to speak. Because وَإِلَّا means otherwise. Otherwise what? Otherwise, if you can't stand while it's moving. That's what that means. But that was not included, that phrase was not included in the original text because it's understood, it's inferred from it. So the Arabic language is a type of language where a lot of inference is made. And it's, as the Arabs said, al-balaghatul ijaz. Al-balagha al-ijaz. Balagha means to eloquence, or to convey a message, is to be precise, or as people like to say, short and sweet. In other words, you don't use many words, you only use as many words as you need to convey the meaning intended. So if there's no need to repeat the phrase again, and the Arabic language allows you that, then you say, وَإِلَّا, and except if that situation is not true, you can't stand, فَقَاعِدًا, then while sitting down. So here we have an example in this hadith of two scenarios, and it could be two different people, or it could be the same person, and one time, it's quite possible that during Dhuhr, they prayed and they stood up and they moved with the Qibla and everything was fine. They're still on the boat, they get up for Asr and now they're feeling a little bit seasick. It's not the same as Dhuhr. What should they do now? Pray sitting, because it allows you to pray sitting, even though previously, in the prayer just before, you prayed standing up. So again, even the situation can change for you from one prayer time to the next. And again, that's an example of the beauty and the flexibility of Sharia Muhammadiyya ala sahibi abdul salatu wassalam. So that's that hadith. Now, I mentioned earlier about at-tafsir al-ishari, or the Ishari commentary. Imam Abu Jamrah has a lengthy commentary on this hadith in terms of its ishara, right? So he said, what about the idea of actually getting on the ocean to begin with? And he even mentions that Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, he sometimes forbade people to get on a boat and get into the ocean, because it represents a vast unknown. And part of our Islamic understanding is that we do not undertake the unknown unless we're prepared for it, right? Unless we have some indication that we know the ruling about it, and we know what possibly could happen to us during something that's unknown. And so even the word that we use to describe good relations and good actions between one and another and what's good of the deen, it's called ma'roof, right? وَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Ma'roof comes from عَرَفَ يَعْرِفُ مَعْرُوفًا. So ma'roof is that which is known, literally, that which is known. And so good form with others includes that which is known, that which is agreed upon between people as being a good action, al-ma'roof. وَتَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. Right? Like people like to, what do they call it? Enjoining the good and forbidding the wrong. Actually, as I said, good here is ma'roof. وَالْمُنْكَرِ. Munkar, that which is literally it means it comes from nakira, and nakira means unknown. So the munkar is that which is unknown. In other words, that which is unknown to be good. So if it's not known to be good, then it's reverse. It's known to be bad. So you stay away from that, or you refrain from it. So here, the vast ocean in a physical sense is unknown. And so even early on, the Sahaba were cautious about getting on a boat and going out into the ocean. And we should also keep in mind that the people of the Arabian Peninsula were not really a seafaring type of people. The most they knew of the sea was the Red Sea, and even then the crossing of the Red Sea was not something that was a regular occurrence because the other side was complete desert. And even the Tihama, the coastal area of the Arabian Peninsula, was uninhabited. Mecca and Medina were not on the coast. Jeddah is a newer city that's on the coast. So they were largely uninhabited. So they weren't seafaring people. After this, Imam Abu Jamrah, he talks about, well, what about al-buhur al-ma'nawiyya? What about the oceans that are not physical? They're not literal, but they're figurative. And he mentions 7 of them, or 6 of them. And one of them, he says, is Bahr al-Dunya, the ocean of dunya, right? Because you can think of the dunya as a bahr, the dunya, this world, as an ocean that we're all trying to cross, that we're all journeying across. So we don't have a choice but except to get on the boat that's going through the ocean of dunya, he says, so to speak. But are you prepared for it? Have you gotten yourself in the right mode, in the right state to cross this ocean of dunya, to traverse it? And any of us who go on a trip, right, the night before or sometime beforehand, what do we usually do? We prepare, right? We see what we need. So if we're traveling to a climate that is warmer than where we're living, so to speak, then we make sure we have summer clothes. If we're going somewhere that's the opposite, where it's colder than what we're used to, make sure you bring your winter apparel and so forth, so that you're quite prepared to deal with the situation that you're at. And so Imam Ibn Abi Jamrah, he says that when you're takhud bahr al-dunya, when you're going toward the bahr al-dunya, then you should also prepare yourself in a similar manner. Because there's many things you can partake of in the dunya, but you shouldn't go in particular areas that are unknown, like the deep end, and only go in those areas that you need. So if you're on a journey and you're going across the ocean, there's no reason to diverge from the route that you need. And there's no reason to make stops at islands here and there that are not particular to your journey. You're going to a particular point. And for us, our journey is towards al-akhirah. It's towards the next life. So to make pit stops along the way at particular islands here and there, in other words, zakhraf al-hayat al-dunya, the beauty and adornments of the dunya, that don't increase us in knowledge, don't increase us in taqwa, and only distract us, we should stay away from. We shouldn't get on that boat, so to speak. And so when we're traversing the ocean of dunya, then the Imam says we should keep this in mind. And he mentions some others, like Bahr al-Shahawat, the ocean of shahawat, or lower and carnal desires, physical desires, which every human being has some stock in. Everyone, it's all a part of us. For the desire for food and drink and the sensual experiences, these are all things that are intrinsic to the human being. But he says when you're going across Bahr al-Shahawat, again the idea is to take that which is necessary and that which is ma'ruf, and not to go outside of that. In Islam we have certain dietary laws, right? Ahkam, about what we can eat, what we can't eat, and they're not that many actually. You know, everything that's available to us we can eat, and there are free things here and there that we cannot. And so to follow and to traverse the bahr of our shahawat, of our desires, it's always best to stick with that which is known and that which is secure and that which we know. And the same thing with our sensual desires. You know, marriage is an institution that it's there so that we can traverse and we have a healthy and practical outlet for those shahawat, for those physical desires. And he also mentions that physical desires are in direct juxtaposition to spiritual understanding. So in other words, the more that we partake in the fulfillment of physical desires, the further we move away from understandings and openings that can come our way. And probably the best example of that is the fasting in Ramadan. When the Quran says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون, taqwa. So it has been prescribed for you like it has been prescribed for those before you, so that you may find taqwa. And one might, well, how's that? How keeping from food and drink and being hungry, how does that give me taqwa? It gives you taqwa in the sense that you are now becoming more in touch with your spiritually otherworldly side, and you're moving away from your physical side. Because as who we are, human beings, we have both. Right? The Quran says we can be asfal as-safilin. We can be the lowest of the low when all we do is partake in the fulfillment of physical desires, much like al-baha'im, much like creatures, animals, farm animals. Or we can be fi a'la al-'illiyin. We can be amongst the highest of maqams, the highest of places, if we become more like the angels who don't have fulfillment of physical desire, but they have ta'ah and taqwa and remembrance and praising the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so to put us more in touch with that otherworldly side, with that spiritual side, then we have to move away from our side of physical desires. And so that's why they said you take in as much as you need. In other words, it's a necessity, no one denies it, and that one has to partake in it. But when it becomes more than just a fulfillment and becomes more your own object, and your hadaf, your intent in life, is fulfillment of desires, as we see all around us, you know, everything is sort of pulling us towards that. Popular society as it exists now, popular culture, is all about just fulfillment of your desires. That's all it's asking you to do. Look at all of the type of advertising that they do today. If you look at it, it's playing on each type of shahwa, each type of physical desire or other type of desire within the human being. So when the drink advertisement tells you just do it or quench your thirst, it's telling you just fulfill it. Don't worry about the consequences. Don't worry about if it's good for you, if it's bad for you. That's not important. What's important, you fulfill that desire. When you see the advertisement for certain types of luxury cars, it'll say, join this class. Now be amongst the people who are part of this particular status. That's a type of shahwa. Shahwat al-shuhra or shahwat al-jah, the desire to be seen as someone who's in a status of prestige. Imam al-Ghazali talks about this at length. And he says that people actually seek prestige, they don't seek wealth. Wealth is a means to prestige, to jah. So people seek wealth, so that, and prestige is shuhra, prestige is popularity. Prestige is you walking down the street and people knowing who you are and pointing and saying, oh, look who that is, and so forth. And so, I think people have figured out new ways of finding prestige now. And then the prestige brings them wealth, right? All you have to do is do some type of stupid reality show, and then you became famous, and then people actually pay you money to attend their events and attend their parties and things like this, and then you say, what did they actually accomplish? What's great about Kim Kardashian? I don't get it. What is it that she's done that deserves all of this attention, all of these accolades? And you see that even on major news websites, her news is like part of the general news. And it shows a deterioration of the society that we're living in when we are holding up as idols. These people are idols, right? They even call them idols, right? They're asnam. They're symbols. They're of the worst in us. Of looking and putting value in things that should have no value whatsoever. Just popular being for the sake of popular, because of a particular show they went on or tape they made. And sometimes they made tapes of completely distasteful and disgusting things, and that leads to their popularity. So that's a very backwards, I think, degenerative type of society that puts value in these type of things. And society that's leading towards decadence. And decadence is when shahawat, fulfillment of shahawat, fulfillment of desires, become primary. And when virtue, and when prudence and temperance and justice and social activism become secondary, or even not given any value whatsoever, or even are belittled in a sense. And that's kind of the opposite of what it should be. What it should be is peace and justice and equity between people and fair dealings. These should be the underpinnings of society, not just a naked type of fulfillment of desires and at the expense of many others' happiness and at the expense of many others' well-being. And that's what's happening, I think, today. Nas'Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afiyah wa musta'an. Allah get us out of this difficult period. I think that it's happening worldwide. It's not just in the West, it's everywhere. So that's Bahr al-Shahawat, and he goes into some others, but I think that will suffice us for now. We can move on to the next hadith. So we've only done one hadith in an hour and a half. Sorry about that, but the Sahaba, they would say Sayyidina Umar said he took him 10 years to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah, not because he's weak in memorization, but because when they learned something, they applied it. So when we learn something, the idea is to apply it, not just to have, I have this much Quran memorized and I have these many hadith memorized. That's commendable. That's good, but that's not really the point. The point is that you put it into action. And Imam Malik himself, he said, ليس العلم رواية الحديث أو ليس العلم بالرواية إنما العلم نور يقذفه الله في القلب. Knowledge is not how many hadith you can narrate. Rather, knowledge is a light Allah casts into your heart. So the light of knowledge, نور العلم, هذا هو المقصود. That's what we're looking for. So, inshallah, Allah will gaze upon us and enlighten us. So the next hadith, عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه. And Anas ibn Malik was an Ansari from Ahl Medina, and he was one of the Sahaba who was a khadim, who was a servant of the Prophet ﷺ voluntarily. And Imam Nawawi includes his hadith of Imam Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, how he said he served the Prophet 10 years sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a young man, and he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never said to me, why did you do something when I did it, or why did you not do something when I failed to do it? So he never reproached Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik for anything. And not for anything, but because that was his way with people. His way was not a way of individual reproachment. Even when he wanted to reproach, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wouldn't mention people by name. He would say, مَا بَالُكُمْ بِقَوْمٍ يَفْعَلُونَ كَذَا وَكَذَا مَا بَالُ قَوْمٍ يَفْعَلُونَ كَذَا وَكَذَا. What do you think of a people who do such and such, or people who do this? He never mentioned anyone by name. He wasn't someone to humiliate. He wasn't someone to uncover the aura of people in public and to cite them by name or say, look at this fasiq, or look at this kafir, or look at this thing, or look how he's treating this, or look how what she's doing, and so forth. Or even, he wouldn't even mention, he would say the word qawm, which is a general term for people. He wouldn't say, ما بال بهذه القبيلة حتى, this tribe or that tribe, or name of people by the grouping that they belong to. Very generic term. So he was trying to make the ibrah with the action, not the people themselves. So to denigrate people, a person or persons, because of their membership to a particular race or ethnicity, or even a school of thought, wasn't the way of the Prophet ﷺ. He didn't call the Khawarij Khawarij. He foretold of them. He described them by their actions, right? He said that they're, تنكرون صلاتكم أمام صلاتهم, or كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, like you will belittle your prayer, or تحقرون صلاتكم, you belittle your prayer when you see them pray, because they had a lot of ibadah, a lot of devotion, and your tilawa next to their tilawa, you're reading a Quran next to theirs. ولكن تلاوتهم لا يجاوز حناجرهم, أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. But their tilawa does not go past their throats. In other words, it's all zahir. It's all outside, it's all show. But inside, the ma'ani, the meanings, the sunnah, it's not there. But he didn't call them by name. And he didn't say by name, this person or that person or group. The term Khawarij came later on because they seceded from the Khilaf. But he said, a people who do this, or a people who do that. So his way wasn't a way of individual rapprochement. It wasn't a way of humiliation, of revenge, of intiqam, of intisar حتى. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا ينتصر لنفسه. He wouldn't seek individual retribution on his own behalf. وإنما كان يعفو ويصفح. يعفو ويصفح. He would pardon and turn away and let it go. العفو والصفح. That's what he would do. He wouldn't keep this, as we do, this feeling of revenge, retribution for perceived wrongs to us. And I say perceived because they're not always true. We perceive them as such only. And then we have this feeling of intiqam, of retribution, and we want to get back at them. And we totally dismiss people and groups. We have a way of putting an X on people and groups we don't like anymore, as if they don't exist. Right? If you're associated with a particular group, then no, you can't go to the other group. Then you're one of them. Salam, I'm one of them. Why? Because I chose to speak to them or to interact with them. Now I'm excommunicated from your group because I associated with the other group. Who are you to say that? We don't have excommunication in Islam, aslan. We don't have a clerical class like in the Catholic Church that has the ability to declare people outside of the deen or inside of the deen. It's not our job. It's not our way. We're not concerned with that. We're not allowed, for example, to say anyone is in heaven or everyone is in hell, except we have nas qat'i. In other words, a clear text from the Quran or strong sunnah hadith that says so. تبت يد أبي لهب وتب لعنة الله عليه. Say it and ولا حرج. Abu Lahab is in hellfire. No doubt. Why? Because the Quran says so. You don't have to worry about that. Al-Ashar al-Bashirin bil-Jannah, the 10 Sahaba who were promised paradise in the Hadith, the 4 Khulafa, Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman, and Talha, Zubair, Sa'id, all of them, fine. They're in heaven. Hassan or Hussein, Prophet ﷺ said about them that they are Sayyid al-Shabab al-Jannah, they are the Sayyids of the youth of paradise, then they're in paradise. That's all we can say. Anyone else, we cannot say. Right? We can't say they're in hellfire or they're in heaven. Even when we have a tarahum, right? When we say fulan rahimahullah. Rahimahullah, even though it's what we call jumla khabariya, right? Which means we're actually conveying a message. So literally it's saying, fulan, this person, Allah had mercy on him. So we're not actually, its meaning though is not khabar, its meaning is dua. You're actually making a dua for him. So we're not confirming that Allah has shown His mercy upon them. We're asking Allah to show His mercy upon them. So fulan rahimahullah, radiyallahu anhum, may Allah be pleased with them, is how it's translated. But radiyallahu anhum, it's actually fa'al madi. It's actually a verb in the past tense, literally in terms of the linguistic meaning of the phrase. So it's a dua. It's making a dua. Same way, rahimahullah, radiallahu anhu, so forth. Alayhi salatu wassalam. For the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously it's confirmed that his blessings and salutations are on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In that case, it's not only dua, you're actually informing it to be true. Right? Why? Because the Quran says, Inna Allahu malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina aman sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. The Quran says that Allah and His angels praise and offer their blessings, salutations upon the Prophet ﷺ. Then we are in turn asked to do the same. That's confirmed. Khalas. But anything else, recently I've seen many people with all of the strife happening in the Arab world now, people getting killed and so forth, and assassinated and this and that, and he's in hellfire. You know he's in hellfire? How do you know that? هذا افتراء. You're making iftira, you're making a claim on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is min ilm al-ghayb. This is from the knowledge of the unseen, of the unknown, and you don't know. You don't know what happened. You don't know what happened after that. You don't know how Allah dealt with them. You don't know if even an inkling of tawbah entered into their heart. No, impossible. Allah can have mercy on such a person. They were a tyrant, and they were a zalim, and they were this, and they were that, and they killed all these people. So now you know where Allah's mercy can reach and where it can't reach. Ish adrak. Right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said only 1/100th of His mercy was for the dunya, and 99 1/100ths of His mercy is for the akhirah, who are you to say where His mercy reaches and where it doesn't reach? How would you know that? It's not for us to say. Right? من حسن المسلم تركه ما لا يعني. From the adab, from the husn, from the goodness of the Muslim is to not be engaged in those things that do not concern him. أحوال الناس في الآخرة, what happens to them, what doesn't happen to them, doesn't concern us. What concerns us? What happens to me and you? What we're doing now in the dunya, that concerns us. What amal are we going to bring forth for the last day? Did we treat everyone that came into contact with us in a fair and equitable and peaceful manner, or did we not? Did we wrong anybody? If we did we correct those wrongs? Did we go about it in the right way? If we wronged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some way in terms of something remiss with Him, did we make tawbah? Did we do those things? Are we doing those things? That's what our concern is. That's our matter. That is our that is our aspiration. That is what we're supposed to be thinking about. Not thinking about this person or that person, or fulan and alan, where they went, what they did, or if they're in hellfire, if they're in heaven. I'm not going to be asked about that. No one is going to ask you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask you, why is this person in hell or in heaven, or why did he go, or why did he not go? But He's going to ask you if you said he's in hell, or this person is in heaven, because you wronged him. And you don't even wrong that person, you wronged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you claim something of His knowledge we have no knowledge about. And that is the biggest type of lying. It is the worst type of lying, when you make a claim against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second worst type of lying is when you make a claim or you misrepresent the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. And that's why he said in the mutawatir hadith, and it's one of the few hadith that's mutawatir. In other words, its veracity is in the same category as the Quran. When he said, "Man kadhaba alayya falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar." Hadith mutawatir. In other words, it had many, many chains of transmission, so many Sahaba, that it's absolute in terms that the Prophet said. So whoever lies or misrepresents what I said, فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Then let him find his seat in hellfire. Okay, so we sort of digressed a little bit. Back to the hadith. Imam Anas radiallahu anhu, Ibn Malik. And we described about how he served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, and he said, and also the Prophet ﷺ made dua for Anas based upon a request of his mother, the mother of Anas, that he live long and have many children. And it said that he lived to nearly 100 years, and he also had nearly 100 children. So the dua of the Prophet ﷺ is mustajab. The Prophet ﷺ makes dua for you, know it's mustajab. So he said, قال كنا نصلي مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيضع أحدنا طرف الثوب من شدة الحر في مكان السجود. Said we used to pray with the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. So one of us would put the taraf of the thawb, which means the like the sleeve, or if it's a turban, like the end part of it. Put it in the ground, so to speak, or in front of us to prostrate on. من شدة الحر, from the heat of the ground when we were making sujood. طيب. So, here we also see, like the previous hadith, somewhat similar situation. There's some commonalities between the two. Namely, that there's a type of mashaqqa, or hardship, that would be incurred otherwise. Even though normally, under normal conditions, there's other hadith that talk about how you should not make prostration on anything except, what's the ground itself. And that it shouldn't be something that's actually on you that you're wearing. But here he clearly says, طرفي الثوب, or طرف الثوب, which means like a sleeve, or maybe something that comes down from your head covering, so as not to have a direct touch with the ground. And again, we should know what was the physical situation of the masjid during the Prophet ﷺ's time. One, it was quite small. If any of you have had the fortune of being to using the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, that area that you see in front of where the mihrab is now, where the imam stands, was not part of the original masjid. That's all new, which is a width of about 1.5 meters. So that's not part of it. You go back to the original mihrab, which is behind it. And there you have istawanat, which you have the columns that were the original pillars of the masjid, and they're green. And on top of each istiwana, each pillar, you will see like a particular name. Like one of them says, istiwanat Abi Lubaba. Abu Lubaba was one of the ones, تخلفوا عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في غزوة تبوك. He didn't go to Tabuk, and then he was one of the three that the ayah came down, that the الذين خلفوا حتى ضاقت بهم الأرض بما رحبت وضاقت عليهم أنفسهم. The ones that they became so constricted and so forth because of, they missed Tabuk for whatever reason, and they were rebuked in the Quran, and even there was a general command that no one was to speak to them and no one was to have any dealings with them until their matter would be revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Lubaba, out of his sadness and depression, he went and took himself and he tied himself to this istiwana, this column that hold up the masjid, and he said, I will not leave from here until the Prophet ﷺ reveals something in my way or forgives me. That was, what can you say about the Sahaba and that? And even some of them were tried by the kuffar and the munafiqun, and said, قومك قد جفاك. It looks like your people have been bad to you. Why don't you come with us? And even though he felt this, imagine you're in this community, and then just like that, one day you made a mistake, and nobody wants to talk to you, and nobody wants to have anything to do with you whatsoever. But the church across the street, they said, oh, it looks like your people are not so happy with you anymore. Why don't you come with us, and we'll give you food, and we'll give you a place to stay, and we'll treat you right, and so forth. Would sound a little bit like an offer that you might consider, considering that everybody has cut you off. But they didn't consider it, the Sahaba. Abadan. Even though there was this jafa, there was this period of difficulty, they still loved the Prophet ﷺ, they still loved the Sahaba, and they loved in Medina, and they loved being in Medina. And he tied himself to that istiwan until the ayah was revealed that their tawbah was accepted. So the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ was originally those columns. And so it was quite small. Also, there was no balat, there was no carpet like this, or there was no marble or anything. It was actually hasba, which were pebbles or sand. And then for a while there wasn't even a roof in the beginning. So it was just like 4 walls or 3 walls, and then the entrance was partially covered. And there was no minaret or anything. There was no mihrab, prayer niche like we have, didn't have that. So it was just a straight wall. And so when they went and prayed, they actually prayed and they went in with their sandals and so forth, because they're still like on the ground. And so it was affected by the heat. And Mecca, even in some of the winter months, is still pretty hot. And so during like a prayer like Dhuhr prayer, or even Asr, when the sun has been shining on those hot pebbles or the hot sand, to put your head on that. Some of you may have tried it in the haram itself, even with the white tile that they have there that reflects some of the heat. If you try to pray there in the summer and Dhuhr and you even walk on it, you know how hot it can get. So imagine that. I mean, that's how hot they were dealing with when they were there. And so Anas ibn Malik, he said, some of us, kana ahaduna. He didn't say all of us. He said some of us or one of us would do that. He may have been talking about himself, maybe talking about somebody else. Would put the thobe so as to protect himself from the heat of the place. So then one might say there's no mention of the Prophet ﷺ here, right? Because he says, "Kana ahaduna, fayadu ahaduna taraf al-thawb." One of us would put it, and he didn't say later on and the Prophet ﷺ said that's okay or it's not okay. He didn't mention that. But what's implicit here is that Anas ibn Malik wouldn't have mentioned this to begin with unless the Prophet ﷺ approved of it. Because we know the sunnah to be 3 things, right? According to at least the usuliyun. The af'al, what the Prophet ﷺ actually does, his aqwal, what he says, right? وَمَا أَقَرَّ عَلَيْهِ, what he approved of. What he tacitly approved of, or what he actually, saraha, what he said. If he said it, then it becomes from his aqwal. But it can be, if it inferred that he approved of it, then that's part of his sunnah. And no one can claim it's not sunnah or it's a lesser sunnah. La, it's still part of the sunnah. So he approved of this. So then the hadith also says, or what it doesn't say, is that they went and told him we used to do this. So how would he know? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he's not facing them, right? He's facing towards the qibla. They're behind him. How would he know if someone put his thobe or didn't put his thobe? But the Nabi ﷺ, كَانَ يَرَى مِنْ خَلْفِهِ كَمَا يَرَى مِنْ أَمَامِهِ. Prophet ﷺ can see from behind as he can see from the front. مُطَّلَعْ. He sees the ahwal of the people behind him, of the musallin behind him. How the Nabi ﷺ, it's not just anybody, right? There's things, there's mu'jizat, there's miraculous things about his nature that no other man, no other person ever had. So he saw from behind him, right? And he knew that if the saf was mu'awwaj, if the line wasn't straight, even not looking at them, and he would tell them, saf al-sufuf. So he knew what was going on from behind him. Kana muttala'. And that's intrinsic, implicit to this hadith. Anyone who claims otherwise, you show them this hadith. That he used to see from behind himself as he saw from the front. And even though it's explicit in other hadith, but here, very easily, you can discern that that's the case. So, he sees from what's behind him as he sees what's in front. And the fact that either 2 things might have happened here. Either A, he was aware of it and he said nothing. If he said nothing, then it means he approved of it. Because from the aspects of nubuwah or of risala, of being a messenger, is that not to keep silent on things that are munkar, or things that should not be kept silent about. So if he kept silent about it, that means it's proved. That means it's okay. Or there could have been something outside the context of this hadith where they actually told him, and it's not mentioned here, they told him, we do this, is that okay? And he said, fine, that's okay. That's possible as well. But it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Could have been merely that he was aware of it, and by the fact he said nothing, then it's fine. And there's other hadith that you'll read that will say, كنا في عهد النبوة صلى الله عليه وسلم نفعل كذا وكذا. We used to be, during the time of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, we used to do this and this. That's also hujjah, that's also proof. Because when the Sahaba say we used to do this during the time of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, that means with his approval. Not that they did it and he wasn't approving of it. So we're out of time, huh? Okay, so we'll stop here inshallah and we'll finish after the break.
Inshallah. So